Hello, lovely souls, and welcome to Emily Whispers. I'm Emily, and I'm so happy you decided to join me tonight. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment and say hello. I love connecting with each of you. If these little moments bring you peace, please like and subscribe so we can share more of them together. Now, find your cozy spot. Wrap yourself in a blanket if you like. Take a slow, gentle breath. And let's drift into tonight's story. Story 1. The headlights flickered and my heart sank. Not now, not here. I was driving home from my brother's place, taking the high mountain pass to avoid the interstate. The blizzard had been brewing all day, but now it unleashed its full fury. Snow swirled in my headlights like dense static, and the wipers struggled to keep up. The road ahead was a blur of white and darkness. That's when my snow cat decided to give up. It started with a strange whining noise. I eased off the accelerator, hoping it would stop, but then the engine cut out completely. I coasted to the side of the road, my stomach twisting into knots. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The wind howled against the cab, creating a cacophony that matched my racing thoughts. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, in a blizzard, with a dead vehicle. I tried the ignition again, praying for a miracle. Nothing, not even a click. My satellite phone was the next logical step. I fumbled for it in my pack, my hands shaking slightly. No signal, of course. "Come on," I muttered, holding the phone up to the window. Still nothing, just a mocking no service message staring back at me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Someone would come along eventually, right? It was just a matter of waiting it out. I locked the doors and settled in, watching the snow hammer down on the windshield. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The snow didn't let up. The road stayed empty. I could feel panic starting to creep in, but I kept telling myself it would be fine. I turned off all non-essential systems to save the battery and sat in the dark. The sound of the wind was deafening, screaming against the metal frame of the cat. There were moments where I swore I heard something else, something moving out there in the whiteout. I tried not to think about it. It was around the 3rd hour when I finally saw a single headlight, a lone beam cutting through the swirling snow behind me. I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. I sat up straighter, hoping whoever it was would stop. As the light got closer, I could see it was a snowmobile, one of those old, rugged ones with an engine that whined loud even over the storm. The snowmobile slowed as it passed my cat, then stopped a few feet ahead. My heart was racing again, but this time from a mix of relief and nerves. I wasn't sure what kind of person would stop for a stranded man in the middle of nowhere in a blizzard. But at that point, I didn't have much of a choice. I saw the driver's door of his enclosed cabin open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a heavy fur-lined parka pulled low over his face and a dark cap. He stood there for a moment, looking at my cat through the snow before walking over. I cracked my window just a bit, enough to talk, but not too wide. I didn't want to let the blowing snow in, but also, something about him made me hesitate. "Vehicle trouble?" he asked, leaning down a little to peer inside. "Yeah, it just died on me a few hours ago," I replied, trying to sound calm. "I've been waiting for someone to pass by." He looked around, scanning the empty road, then back at me. "No signal out here, huh?" I shook my head. "None." He was quiet for a moment, then smiled, a little too wide, showing teeth that were slightly yellowed. "Lucky I came by then," he said, his voice too casual. "Not a lot of people take this pass at night, especially in weather like this." I nodded, hoping he would just offer to call someone for me. But instead, he stepped closer to the window, glancing inside the cat. "You alone out here?" I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the way he asked made me uncomfortable. "Yeah, but my brother knows I'm stuck," I lied. "He's on his way." The man didn't seem convinced. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "In this weather, it's going to take him a while to get here." I didn't know what to say. I just wanted him to leave, or at least call for help and go. But he wasn't moving. He kept staring at me, his eyes lingering a little too long, making me feel like I was trapped in my own vehicle. "Mind if I take a look at the engine?" he asked suddenly, stepping back and motioning toward the front of the cat. I hesitated, but I didn't want to seem rude or scared. "Sure," I said, popping the engine cover. He walked around to the front of the cat, and I watched as he fiddled with something under the hood. But after a few minutes, he came back to the window, shaking his head. "Looks like your fuel line is frozen solid," he said, but there was something off about his tone. "I can try to thaw it, but you'll probably need a tow." I nodded, trying to stay calm. "That would be great, thanks." He walked back to his snowmobile, and I watched him through the rearview mirror. My heart was racing again, and my hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Something about this didn't feel right. I didn't trust him. He took his time getting a small torch, moving slower than he needed to. When he finally came back and started working on the fuel line, he leaned into my window again, closer this time. "You know, it's dangerous for a man to be out here alone," he said, his voice low. "You never know who might come by." His words sent a wave of fear through me, but I forced a smile. "Yeah, well, I'm lucky you stopped." He smiled again, that same unsettling grin. "Yeah, lucky." He got back to work, and after a few minutes, my cat's engine sputtered to life. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. As I thanked him, he leaned in one last time. "Maybe you should let me follow you, just in case something happens again." I shook my head quickly. "No, that's okay. My brother's almost here. Thanks for the help." His smile faded for a second, but then it returned, colder this time. "All right, suit yourself." I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I pulled away as fast as I could, not caring if I was driving too fast for the blizzard. My heart was pounding in my chest the entire time, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see his snowmobile following me. But thankfully, its light was gone, swallowed by the snow. I didn't slow down until I was back on a well-lit, populated road. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. As I drove, my mind raced with what-ifs. What if I hadn't lied about my brother? What if I had let him follow me? What were his true intentions? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how vulnerable I had been. I made it home safely that night, but the experience stayed with me. Every time I drive alone now, especially at night or in bad weather, I think about that man. I think about how quickly a simple breakdown can turn into something potentially dangerous. I've since learned to always be prepared. I keep a full winter emergency kit in my cat, complete with extra fuel, a powerful flashlight, and a portable satellite beacon. I make sure someone always knows where I am when I'm traveling alone, and I trust my instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. That night taught me that the real monsters aren't always supernatural beings or movie villains. Sometimes they're just ordinary people who take advantage of others in vulnerable situations. It's a lesson I'll never forget, and one I hope others can learn from without having to experience it firsthand. As I settled into bed that night, the storm still raging outside, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful that I had made it home safely. Grateful for the instincts that had kept me cautious, and grateful for the wake-up call that had made me more aware of my surroundings. But even as I drifted off to sleep, a part of me couldn't shake the image of that man's smile, too wide and too cold, or the sound of his voice as he suggested following me home. In my dreams, I saw a single headlight in my rearview mirror, always there, no matter how fast I drove or how many turns I took. The experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the potential dangers that lurk in everyday situations. But I'm also stronger, more prepared, and more determined to never let myself be a victim. As the days passed, I found myself checking the local news, half expecting to see a story about a traveler who wasn't as lucky as I had been. But there was nothing, just the usual reports of minor accidents and weather-related incidents. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted, if the man was just trying to help, and my fear had twisted his actions into something sinister. But then I remember the look in his eyes, the way he lingered too long, asked too many questions, and I know that trusting my instincts was the right thing to do. I've shared my story with friends and family, urging them to be careful, to be prepared. Some listen with wide eyes, promising to be more cautious. Others brush it off, assuring me that nothing like that would ever happen to them. I hope they're right, but I know better now. I know that danger can find you when you least expect it, on a lonely mountain pass in the middle of a blizzard. The experience has become a part of me now, a constant reminder to stay alert, to trust my gut, and to never take my safety for granted. It's a heavy lesson, but one I'm grateful to have learned without paying a higher price. And so, life goes on. I still drive that pass sometimes when I visit my brother, but now I make sure my cat is in perfect condition before I leave. I check the weather forecast obsessively, and I always keep my beacon charged and within reach. Because you never know when a simple drive home might turn into something much more dangerous. And when it does, being prepared might just save your life. Story 2. The first sandstorm hit with a fury that felt personal, and I knew I was in trouble. I'd been so caught up in the thrill of exploring the dune sea that I'd completely lost track of time and my bearings. I've always loved desert trekking, the solitude of the vast emptiness, the challenge of pushing my limits. But as the sky turned a bruised orange and the wind picked up, I realized I'd made a rookie mistake. I was lost. The landmarks I'd been following were now obscured by the growing gloom and the increasingly dense, swirling sand. The storm started in earnest, sharp grains of sand quickly soaking through my light gear. I hadn't packed for this, another mistake. My satellite phone, usually a reliable lifeline, showed no signal, of course. I was truly on my own. I pushed on, hoping to find a familiar rock formation, or at least some higher ground where I might get my bearings. But the desert seemed to close in around me, the dunes looming larger and more ominous with each passing minute. The sound of the wind howling across the sand created a disorienting white noise that made it hard to think clearly. As darkness fell, panic began to set in. I was blasted by sand, shivering, and completely turned around. That's when I saw it, a faint glimmer of light through the storm. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a mining outpost, or at least another traveler with a powered-down rover. I stumbled towards the light, sand whipping at my face, my boots sinking with every step. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a small, prefab shelter. It wasn't much, just a simple metallic structure, but in that moment, it looked like salvation. I approached the airlock, my heart pounding. This deep in the desert, who knew what or who I might find? But I was out of options. I raised my hand and hit the cycle button, the sound barely audible over the howling wind and pounding sand. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, just as I was about to try again, I heard movement inside, slow, shuffling steps approaching the door. I held my breath as the inner hatch creaked open. The man who stood before me was not what I expected. He was old, impossibly old, with a face so lined, and weathered it looked like a topographical map. His eyes, pale and rheumy, seemed to look right through me. "Hello," I stammered, sand dripping from my chin. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've gotten lost in the storm. Could I possibly come in and get out of the wind for a bit?" The old man didn't respond immediately. just stood there, staring at me with those unsettling eyes. Then, slowly, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said, his voice a dry rasp that sent a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't be out in this weather." I hesitated for a moment, my instinct screaming at me that something wasn't right. But the howling wind at my back made the decision for me. I stepped inside. The shelter was dimly lit by a single power cell, casting long shadows across the sparse furnishings. A small thermal unit glowed in a corner, and I gravitated towards it, grateful for the warmth. "Thank you so much," I said, turning to face my host. "I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found your shelter." The old man had shuffled to a rickety chair by the thermal unit. He lowered himself into it with a groan, his joints creaking almost as loudly as the chair. "Not many people come this way," he said, his eyes never leaving me. "Especially not on a night like this." I tried to smile, but something about his gaze made it difficult. I got turned around on one of the survey routes. I thought I knew where I was going, but I trailed off, suddenly aware of how foolish I sounded. The old man nodded slowly. "The desert can be treacherous. It doesn't like outsiders." I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond to such a strange statement. "Well, I'm certainly grateful for your hospitality. Once the storm passes, I'll be on my way." "The storm won't pass," he said, with a certainty that chilled me more than the wind had. "Not for a long while." I looked towards the single, sand-pitted viewport. The wind howled outside as if to confirm his words. "Do you have a comms unit I could use?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "My family will be worried sick." The old man shook his head. "No comms, no long-range power, just me and the desert." My heart sank. I was truly cut off from the world, alone with this strange old man in his isolated shelter. I tried to reassure myself. He had taken me in after all. Surely he meant me no harm. As if reading my thoughts, he spoke again. "You're safe here for now." The way he said "for now" made my skin crawl. I forced another smile. "I appreciate that. I'm sure I'll be able to find my way once it's light out." He didn't respond, just continued to stare at me with those pale, unblinking eyes. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of the thermal unit and the relentless pounding of the sand. I cleared my throat, desperate to break the tension. "So, you live out here all alone?" A small smile curved his thin lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not alone, never alone." I glanced around the small shelter, half expecting to see someone else emerge from the shadows. But we were still the only two people in the room. "Oh, do you have family nearby?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He shook his head slowly. "No family. But the desert is always here. Always watching, always hungry." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with my sand-blasted gear. The way he spoke about the desert, as if it were a living, sentient thing, was deeply unsettling. I'm sure it must get lonely out here, I said, edging slightly away from him. His smile widened, showing teeth that were far too white and perfect. Lonely? No. The desert provides company, and occasionally it provides visitors. The implication in his words was clear, and fear gripped me. I stood up abruptly, no longer caring about politeness. I think maybe I should try to find my way back. The storm seems to be letting up a bit, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. If anything, the storm seemed to have intensified, the wind howling like a living thing outside the shelter walls. The old man didn't move from his chair, but his eyes followed me as I edged towards the airlock. You can't leave, he said, his voice somehow carrying over the noise of the storm. The desert won't let you. I reached for the airlock cycle, my hand shaking. I thank you for your hospitality, but I really must be going. As my fingers touched the cold metal of the panel, a deafening crack of thunder shook the shelter. I jumped back, my heart pounding. The old man chuckled, a dry, wheezing sound that raised the hair on the back of my neck. I told you, the desert wants you to stay. I turned to face him, fear and anger warring inside me. What do you mean? What's going on here? He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. The desert is old, older than you can imagine. And it's hungry, always hungry. It needs to feed. I backed away, my back pressed against the airlock. You're insane. I'm leaving, storm or no storm. I turned and hit the cycle, ready to face whatever was out there rather than spend another moment in this shelter with this madman. But what I saw outside stopped me cold. The desert had changed. The dunes seemed to have moved closer, their crests intertwining to form an impenetrable barrier. And in the gaps between the dunes, I saw eyes, hundreds of glowing eyes, watching me. I slammed the airlock shut, my breath coming in short gasps. What? What is this? The old man's laughter filled the shelter, a sound of pure, malevolent joy. I told you, the desert is hungry. And you, my dear, are the feast. I sank to the floor, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. But the cold floor beneath me, the heat of the thermal unit on my face, the old man's laughter ringing in my ears, it all felt terrifyingly real. As the night wore on, the storm outside seemed to merge with the horror inside the shelter. The wind's howl became the voice of the desert, calling for me. The sand beating against the roof sounded like hundreds of hungry creatures clawing to get in. And through it all, the old man sat in his chair, watching me with those pale, hungry eyes. Waiting, always waiting. I don't know how long I've been here now. Days, weeks. Time seems to have lost all meaning. The storm never stops. The desert never retreats. And the old man, he never sleeps. Sometimes, in my more lucid moments, I wonder if I'm still out there in the desert, lost, alone, hallucinating all of this as dehydration sets in. But then I hear the old man's wheezing laugh, feel the heat of the never-ending thermal unit, and I know this is all too real. I write this now as a warning to you, whoever you are reading these words. Be careful when you venture into the wilderness. Respect the desert, because sometimes, when you're lost in the dunes, the most dangerous thing isn't being alone. It's finding that you're not alone at all. And remember, if you ever find yourself caught in a storm, seeking shelter in a lonely outpost deep in the desert, sometimes it's better to face the storm than what waits for you inside. The desert is always hungry, and now, I fear, so am I. Story 3. The first scream pierced through the low hum of the arcology, jolting me awake. For a moment, I thought I dreamed it. Then I heard it again, a raw, terrified shriek that made my blood run cold. My partner, Kalen, stirred beside me. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. We'd been living in this deep earth settlement for countless cycles, but never had we encountered anything like this. The excitement of our annual geothermal survey had worn off hours ago, replaced by the discomfort of our cramped, metallic bunks while the earth groaned around our hab unit. Now, as another scream echoed through the rock, that discomfort morphed into pure, unadulterated fear. "Maybe it's just a pressure shift," Kalen suggested, but the quiver in his voice betrayed his doubt. I wish I could have agreed with him, but those screams were undeniably human. I fumbled for the light panel, my hands shaking as I flicked it on. The soft glow illuminated Kalen's pale face. "We should check it out," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Someone might need help." Kalen nodded reluctantly. We both knew it was the right thing to do, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. As we unsealed the hab unit door, the sounds of the deep earth hit us full force. The constant geothermal hum had eased to a low rumble, but the rock walls seemed to groan and shift, creating an eerie resonance. Beneath it all, I could hear something else, hushed voices, too low to make out words, but unmistakably there. I stepped out first, scanning the corridor with my headlamp. Our settlement was a small nexus of interconnected tunnels, surrounded by a vast, dark cavern. In the artificial daylight, it had seemed peaceful and secluded. Now, it felt exposed and vulnerable. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding weak and uncertain in the vast space. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" Silence. Even the whispering voices had stopped. The cavern seemed to be holding its breath. Kalen clutched my arm. "Maybe we should go back inside," he whispered. I was about to agree when I saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of the cavern. I swung my headlamp towards it, but whatever it was had vanished into the shadows. "Did you see that?" I asked Kalen. He nodded, his grip on my arm tightening. "What was it?" Before I could answer, we heard it. Footsteps, slow deliberate footsteps crunching on the loose gravel of the cavern floor. They were coming from all around us, closing in on our tunnel nexus. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Kalen's hand and pulled him back towards the hab unit. "We need to get out of here," I hissed. But as we turned, the beam of my headlamp fell on a figure standing directly in our path. It was a person, or at least it had the shape of a person. It was tall and gaunt, dressed in the tattered remains of a mining suit that hung from its frame like rags on a scarecrow. But it was its face that made my heart stop, or rather, the lack of it. Where its features should have been, there was only a blank, featureless expanse of pale, slick skin. Kalen's scream tore through the night, matching the ones that had woken us earlier. I stumbled backward, dragging him with me, only to bump into something solid. Spinning around, I found ourselves face to face with another of these creatures. They were everywhere, emerging from the tunnels like ghosts materializing from the gloom. Each one was different, some short, some tall, some thin, some bulky. But they all shared that same terrifying, featureless face. "Run," I yelled, pulling Kalen towards the gap between two of the figures. We sprinted into the main cavern, crystalline formations whipping at our faces, loose rocks threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, I could hear the creatures giving chase, their footsteps surprisingly fast and coordinated for beings that seemed so unnatural. We ran blindly through the cavern, with no idea where we were going or what direction would lead us to safety. The beam of the headlamp, still clutched tightly in my hand, bounced wildly, creating a strobe-like effect that made the cavern seem even more disorienting. "There," Kalen gasped, pointing ahead. Through the gloom, I could see lights, the main elevator shaft, or maybe the central command module. Either way, it was our best chance. We pushed ourselves harder, ignoring the burning in our lungs and the ache in our legs. The light grew closer, and I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. Maybe we would make it out of this nightmare after all. But just as we were about to break through into the main nexus, something grabbed my ankle. I went down hard, the headlamp flying from my hand and disappearing into the darkness. Kalen stumbled to a stop, turning back for me. "Go," I yelled, struggling against whatever had hold of me. "Get help." For a moment, he hesitated, then with a sob, he turned and ran towards the lights. I watched him go, praying he'd make it to safety. Cold, strong hands gripped my arms, pulling me to my feet. I found myself surrounded by the faceless creatures, their blank visages somehow conveying a sense of curiosity and hunger. One of them stepped forward, its head tilting to the side as if studying me. Then, slowly, it raised a hand to its featureless face. To my horror, the skin began to ripple and shift, molding itself into features, my features. Within seconds, I was staring at a perfect copy of my own face. The others followed suit, their blank faces transforming into a sea of my own terrified expression. It was like looking into a nightmarish hall of mirrors. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only stand there, paralyzed with fear as the creatures closed in around me. The last thing I remember is a chorus of voices, my voice, repeated over and over, saying, "Welcome home." I woke up in a medical bay 3 cycles later. They told me I'd been found wandering along the perimeter fence, miles from our hab unit, babbling incoherently about faceless monsters. Kalen was there, tears in his eyes as he clutched my hand. He told me how he'd made it to the Central Command module and called for help, how search parties had combed the caverns for days before finding me. The official story is that we were attacked by a rogue mining drone, that the trauma of the event, coupled with exposure to geothermal gases, had caused me to hallucinate. They say there's no evidence of any other people in those caverns, let alone creatures like the ones I described. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to me in those deep, dark places. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I can't shake the feeling that the face staring back at me isn't quite my own. We don't go on geothermal surveys anymore. The deep earth holds too many terrors, too many unanswered questions. But even in the safety of our new hab unit, I can't escape the memory of that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see those blank faces. Every time I hear a noise in the dark, I'm back in those caverns, surrounded by creatures wearing my face. And sometimes, in the dead of the sleep cycle, I hear whispers, voices that sound like mine but aren't. They call to me, urging me to return to the deep earth, to come home. I try to ignore them. I try to convince myself it was all just a nightmare, a product of fear and imagination. But deep down, I know the truth. Something happened to me in those caverns, something that changed me in ways I'm still struggling to understand. Kalen notices it too, though he tries to hide it. I catch him watching me sometimes, a look of uncertainty in his eyes. He says I'm different since that night, that sometimes I don't seem like myself. If only he knew how right he is. I've tried to move on, to forget about that night and the horrors we encountered, but it's not that easy. The memories linger, as vivid and terrifying as the moment they happened. And with each passing cycle, I find myself wondering, did I ever really leave those caverns? Or did a part of me stay behind, replaced by something else? I don't have answers, only questions that keep me awake at night. All I know is that the universe is a much stranger and more terrifying place than I ever imagined. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the earth, there are creatures wearing my face, waiting for me to return. So if you ever find yourself on a deep earth survey and hear screams in the night, don't investigate. Don't try to help. Just run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some horrors are too great to face. As for me, I'll keep fighting the whispers, keep trying to hold on to who I am. but a part of me knows it's only a matter of time before the deep earth calls me back. And when it does, I'm not sure I'll be strong enough to resist. After all, how do you run from something that wears your own face? Story 4. The figure's silhouette was barely visible through the curtain of chemical fog. A small, lonely shape on the side of the deserted service conduit. I blinked, certain my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the figure was still there, a stark contrast against the corroded, industrial landscape. I'd been driving for hours, pushing my transport through the relentless, soupy haze to make a late delivery. The monotony of the humming engine and the hiss of the air scrubbers had lulled me into a trance-like state. But the sight of that child jolted me back to full alertness. My foot eased off the accelerator as I approached. What was a kid doing out here, miles from any residential hab, in this weather? As I drew closer, I could make out more details. It was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with short, dark hair neatly combed despite the damp air. She wore a pristine white dress that seemed to glow in the gloom. I pulled over, my hazard lights blinking into the fog. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was a bad idea. I was alone on a deserted service road, stopping for a stranger. But this was a child. I couldn't just drive by. I cycled down my window, wincing as the acrid fog stung my eyes. "Hey there," I called out, trying to sound friendly and non-threatening. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl turned to face me, and I felt an inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the gray light, and her eyes, there was something off about them, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "I'm lost," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of my engine. "Can you help me?" I hesitated, every instinct telling me to drive away, to leave this strange situation behind. But I couldn't abandon a child in need. I took a deep breath and made a decision I would come to question for years to come. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Hop in and we'll figure out where you need to go." I leaned across to cycle the passenger door, and the girl climbed in. The cab filled with the scent of sterile cleaner and something else. Something metallic and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. "What's your name?" I asked as I pulled back onto the conduit, the autopilot struggling to find its track. "Lily," she replied, her voice soft and oddly flat. "Nice to meet you, Lily. I'm Kale. Can you tell me where you live, or maybe your parents' calm link?" Lily didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead, the fog dripping from her hair onto my vehicle's upholstery. "Lily," I prompted, glancing at her, "do you know where your home is?" She turned to look at me then, and I nearly swerved into a support pylon. Her eyes were completely black, no whites visible at all. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things. When I looked again, her eyes were normal, a deep brown, but definitely normal. "I need to go home," she said, her voice suddenly urgent. "They're waiting for me." "Who's waiting for you, Lily?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "My family," she replied. "They're always waiting." Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. I focused on the conduit ahead, my knuckles white on the steering controls. "Okay, but where is home? Can you give me a sector number?" Lily pointed ahead. "That way. Keep going." I drove on, the fog seeming to intensify with every meter. The automated road markers were becoming treacherous to read, deep pools of corrosive runoff forming in the low spots. I slowed down, straining to see through the haze. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, after we'd been driving for about 20 minutes. We were deep in the industrial ruins now, automated factories and processing plants giving way to dense, abandoned structures. Lily nodded, her face eerily calm. "We're almost there. Turn right at the next junction." I followed her directions, turning onto a narrow, unpaved service road that led into a massive, silent factory complex. The derelict buildings loomed over us, their broken windows forming a dark canopy that blocked out what little light remained. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a path that seemed to wind endlessly into the industrial graveyard. "Lily," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I don't think this is right. Maybe we should turn back, find a security checkpoint." "No," she cried, her sudden vehemence making me jump. "We have to keep going. They're waiting." I glanced at her, startled by her outburst. For a moment, just a moment, I could have sworn her eyes were completely black again. But when I looked closer, they were normal. I shook my head, blaming my imagination and the poor light. We drove on in silence, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the constant dripping of condensation from the pipes overhead. The buildings pressed in closer, their rusted metal sides scraping against the sides of the transport. I had to slow to a crawl to navigate the increasingly narrow and twisting path. Just as I was about to insist we turned back, the ruins opened up into a small, paved courtyard. In the center stood a factory, if you could call it that. It was more like a skeletal ruin, its metal walls scarred with age, windows dark and empty. No light shone from within, no sign of life at all. "We're here," Lily said, her voice filled with an emotion I couldn't identify. Was it joy, fear? I couldn't tell. I stopped the transport, staring at the dilapidated structure before us. "Lily, are you sure this is where you live? It doesn't look like anyone's home." She didn't answer. When I turned to look at her, my blood ran cold. She was gone. The passenger seat was empty, with no sign that anyone had ever been there. No damp spots on the seat, no grimy footprints on the floor mat, nothing. I sat there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what was happening. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? A movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. I turned to look out the windshield, and my heart nearly stopped. There, standing in front of the factory, was Lily. But she wasn't alone. Surrounding her were shadowy figures, tall and unnaturally thin. I couldn't make out their features in the gloom, but I could feel their eyes on me. Lily raised her hand and waved, a smile spreading across her face. But it wasn't a child's smile of innocence and joy. It was something else entirely, something that made my blood run cold. I threw the transport into reverse, my foot slamming down on the accelerator. The tires spun on the slick pavement for a heart-stopping moment before finding purchase. I shot backward down the narrow path, girders whipping against the windows. I don't remember much of the drive back. It's all a blur of fog and darkness and bone-deep terror. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest city sector, pulling into a brightly lit security checkpoint like a ship finding safe harbor in a storm. I sat there for a long time, shaking, trying to make sense of what had happened. When I finally worked up the courage to check the passenger seat in the light, there was no sign that Lily had ever been there. No grime, no condensation, nothing. I reported the incident to the local authorities, but they found nothing. No evidence of the factory in the ruins. No missing children matching Lily's description. They put it down to an overactive imagination fueled by fatigue and the stressful driving conditions. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when I saw those figures surrounding Lily, or the smile on her face as she waved goodbye. I don't drive that route anymore. I avoid long trips in the fog, and whenever I see a child alone by the side of the road, I can't help but remember Lily and the terror of that night. Sometimes helping a stranger isn't the right thing to do. Sometimes it's the beginning of a nightmare. So, if you're ever driving on a lonely road in the fog and you see a child standing alone, think twice before you stop. Because you never know who or what might be waiting in the shadows, ready to welcome you home. Story 5. The maintenance lift shuddered to a stop between levels, plunging me into darkness. For a moment, I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, as if on cue, the emergency lights flickered to life, casting an eerie red glow throughout the small space. I'd been working late again, burning the midnight oil to meet a deadline. The arcology had been empty for hours, just me and the gentle hum of the life support. When I finally decided to call it quits, the sandstorm outside had reached its peak. Dust whipped against the armored viewports, and the low rumble of the storm seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Now, trapped in this metal box, I could still hear the storm raging outside, the wind howling through the lift shaft, creating an unsettling whistle that set my teeth on edge. I fumbled for my datapad, hoping to call for help, but the screen remained stubbornly dark. No signal. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the confined space. "Can anyone hear me?" Silence was my only answer. I pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. No alarm, No voice from the speaker assuring me that help was on the way. Just more silence. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. It's okay, I told myself. Someone will notice the lift isn't working. They'll come looking for you. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. It was the middle of the sleep cycle, and I was the only one in the building. No one was coming. That's when I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like claws dragging across metal. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe the lift cable settling. But then I heard it again, louder this time and unmistakably coming from above me. I looked up, my eyes straining in the dim red light. The ceiling of the lift seemed to ripple, as if something was moving on the other side. My breath caught in my throat as I watched a small bulge form in the metal, pushing downward. Then, to my horror, the bulge split open. A hand emerged, pale and skeletal, its fingers unnaturally long and tipped with sharp, black talons. It groped blindly in the air for a moment before finding purchase on the edge of the opening it had created. I pressed myself against the far wall of the lift, a scream building in my throat, but unable to escape. As I watched, frozen in terror, the hand was joined by another. Together, they widened the hole, tearing through the metal as if it were paper. A face appeared in the opening, and I felt my sanity begin to slip. It was humanoid, but only barely. The skin was a sickly gray, pulled tight over sharp cheekbones. The eyes were huge, black, and utterly devoid of any humanity. And the mouth was filled with row upon row of needle-like teeth. The creature began to lower itself into the lift, its body contorting in ways that defied the laws of physics. I could hear its bones cracking and popping as it twisted and squeezed through the opening. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I lunged for the lift doors, my fingers scrabbling at the seam where they met. I pulled with all my might, ignoring the pain as my nails bent and broke. To my surprise and relief, the doors began to part. I could see the corridor outside, dimly lit by more emergency lights. Freedom was just inches away. But as I started to squeeze through the gap, I felt something cold and clammy wrap around my ankle. I looked back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature had fully entered the lift and was reaching for me with those impossibly long arms. Its face was split in a grotesque grin, saliva dripping from its needle teeth. With a strength born of pure terror, I kicked out, my foot connecting with the creature's face. It let out a high-pitched shriek that made my ears ring, but its grip loosened just enough for me to pull free. I tumbled out into the corridor, scrambling to my feet and running without a backwards glance. I could hear it behind me, its talons scraping against the floor as it gave chase. The sound spurred me on, pushing me to run faster than I ever had before. I reached the service stairs and practically flew down them, taking them 3 at a time. The creature's shrieks echoed in the stairwell. sometimes sounding like it was right behind me, other times like it was coming from above or below. By the time I reached the ground floor, my lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly. But I didn't stop. I burst out of the stairwell and sprinted across the main atrium, my eyes fixed on the main airlock and the stormy night beyond. Just as I reached the doors, the power came back on. The atrium was suddenly flooded with bright light, momentarily blinding me. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision, and that's when I saw it. My reflection in the armored glass of the airlock doors. But it wasn't just me. Standing right behind me, its face hovering over my shoulder, was the creature. Its black eyes met mine in the reflection, and its mouth stretched into that terrible, toothy grin. I spun around, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. But there was nothing there. The atrium was empty, save for me. I stood there for what felt like hours, my back pressed against the doors, eyes darting around the atrium, but nothing moved, nothing appeared. Eventually, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. Had I imagined it all? Was it just a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? It seemed impossible that such a creature could exist, let alone vanish into thin air. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way back to the lift. It was working perfectly now. No sign of the hole the creature had torn in the ceiling. The ride up to my floor was uneventful, the lift moving smoothly and stopping exactly where it should. When I reached my hab unit, everything was as I had left it. My datapad was still on, the screen glowing softly in the dark room. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a gentle breeze that whispered against the viewports. I gathered my things quickly, not wanting to spend another moment in the building. As I was about to leave, something caught my eye. There on the sleeve of my jumpsuit was a single, long, black hair. I plucked it off, holding it up to the light. It was unlike any hair I'd ever seen, coarse and wiry, more like a bristle than human hair. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the creature's skeletal hands, its impossibly long fingers. I dropped the hair as if it had burned me and practically ran out of the hab unit. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those black eyes, that mouth full of teeth. I kept expecting to hear that scraping sound, to see those long fingers reaching for me from the shadows. In the light of day, it all seemed absurd, a monster in the lift. It was more likely that I dozed off while working and had an incredibly vivid nightmare. The hair could have come from anywhere. Maybe it wasn't even hair at all. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I couldn't forget the terror I'd felt, the certainty that what I'd seen was real. I still work in that building. I still use that lift, but never alone and never at night. And sometimes, when the lights flicker or the lift shutters, I find myself looking up at the ceiling, half expecting to see those pale hands tearing through the metal. Because deep down, I know the truth. Something was in that lift with me that night, something that shouldn't exist. And worst of all, I don't think it's finished with me yet. So if you ever find yourself working late, alone in an empty building, and the lift stops between floors, don't look up. Don't listen for that scraping sound. And whatever you do, don't wait to see what might be trying to get in. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And some nightmares don't end when you wake up. They're just beginning. Story 6. The research vessel's engines sputtered and died, leaving us stranded in the middle of the ice floe. As if on cue, the sky, which had been a clear, frigid blue, opened up, unleashing a torrent of snow that turned the world into a swirling white blur. I sat there, hands gripping the useless controls, heart pounding in my chest. Of all the places to break down, this had to be the worst. We'd been navigating for hours, my wife, Alara, and I, our 2 kids asleep in the back cabin. What was supposed to be a routine geological survey had turned into a nightmare of wrong turns and shifting ice. "I think we're lost," Alara said, her voice tight with worry. She was right, of course. The GPS had lost its satellite lock an hour ago, and the emergency beacon was useless without a clear signal. We were well and truly in the middle of nowhere. I was about to suggest we hunker down and wait when I felt the vessel lurch. The ice groaned beneath us as we slid sideways, the hull scraping against the frozen sea. We came to a stop at an angle, half on a solid floe and half in the churning, icy water. "Damn it," I muttered, trying to keep my voice low so as not to wake the kids. I tried the engines again, but the controls were dead. Alara turned to me, her face pale in the dim light. "What are we going to do, Kaylin?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm for her sake. "It's okay. I'll get out and see how bad it is. Maybe I can find a stable patch of ice or something to give us a handhold." I cycled the outer airlock, wincing as the bitter cold immediately bit through my insulated suit. The storm had been raging for hours, turning the world into a dark, frozen mess. I circled the vessel, my boots sinking ankle deep into the fresh snow with each step. It was worse than I thought. We were wedged tight. As I stood there, trying to figure out our next move, I saw a flicker of light through the blizzard. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was another research station or convoy. Somewhere we could at least ask for help. I hurried back to the vessel, rapping on Alara's viewport. She slid it open, looking at me expectantly. "I think I saw lights through the snow," I said, pointing. "I'm going to check it out. Maybe someone can help us." Alara's brow furrowed with concern. "I don't know, Kaylin. Maybe we should wait for the storm to break. It's dangerous out there." I shook my head. "We can't stay here all night. The kids will be cold and hungry when they wake up. I'll be quick, I promise." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Okay, but be careful." I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile and set off into the whiteout. The ice was treacherous, hidden crevices and shifting flows threatening with every step. The storm seemed to intensify, if that was even possible, soaking me to the bone within minutes. Just when I was starting to think I'd imagined the light, I broke through into a relatively calm area. There, in the center, stood a small, domed research outpost. A single light burning in one of the viewports, a beacon in the stormy night. Relief washed over me as I approached the airlock. It was old and weathered, barely clinging to the ice. I raised my hand to cycle it, then hesitated. Something felt off. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a chill that had nothing to do with the freezing wind. But what choice did I have? We needed help. I took a deep breath and hit the cycle button. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then I heard movement inside, slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the door. It hissed open, revealing a man who looked as old and worn as the outpost itself. His skin was pale and papery, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They were an unnaturally bright blue, almost glowing in the dim light. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to turn and run. "I'm sorry to bother you so late, but my family and I are stuck. Our vessel is wedged in the ice about a quarter-mile back. I was hoping you might have a comms unit we could use, or maybe some climbing gear." The old man stared at me for what felt like an eternity, those eerie blue eyes seeming to look right through me. Finally, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said. "We'll see what we can do." I hesitated for a moment, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But the thought of Alara and the kids, cold and scared in the vessel, made me step over the threshold. The inside of the outpost was as dilapidated as the outside. The walls were peeling. The furniture looked like it hadn't been used in decades. A small geothermal heater crackled in a corner, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Wait here," the old man said, shuffling off into another room. I stood there, dripping onto the worn floor grating, my eyes darting around the room. That's when I noticed the holo pics. They covered one entire wall, hundreds of them. As I looked closer, my blood ran cold. They were all of people, men, women, children. But something was wrong with each picture. The subjects all had the same terrified expression, their eyes wide with fear. And in the background of each photo, barely visible, was the old man. I was so engrossed in the disturbing images that I didn't hear him return. His voice made me jump. "Your family," he said. "Where are they?" I turned to find him standing much closer than I expected, those blue eyes boring into me. In his hand was not a comms unit or climbing gear, but a large, rusty ice axe. Terror gripped me, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The old man's face split into a grin, revealing teeth that were far too sharp to be human. "Don't worry," he said, his voice no longer a rasp but a deep, rumbling growl. "We'll bring them here. One big, happy family." I didn't think, I just moved. I shoved past him, bolting for the door. I could hear him behind me, that inhuman growl turning into a roar of rage. I burst out into the storm, running as fast as I could through the snow. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. I could hear him crashing through the ice behind me, far too fast for an old man. Whatever he was, it wasn't human. I broke through the snowdrifts, the vessel coming into view. Elara must have heard me coming, because she had already started the emergency thrusters. I threw myself into the airlock, gasping, "Go, go, go." Elara didn't ask questions. She slammed the thrusters to full, the vessel groaning as it broke free from the ice. The back end slid dangerously close to a crevasse before Elara straightened us out. As we sped away, I looked in the side viewport. There, at the edge of the outpost, stood the old man. He wasn't chasing us anymore. He just stood there, watching us fly away, that terrifying grin still on his face. Then, as we rounded a massive ice spire, he was gone. We flew for hours, not stopping until we reached the nearest corporate station. We reported what happened to the authorities, but they found nothing. No outpost on the ice, no creepy old man. They put it down to stress and lack of oxygen, a shared hallucination brought on by the dangerous conditions. But I know what I saw. I know what we escaped from, and I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when I saw those holo pics, or the inhuman speed with which that old man chased me through the ice. We don't go on geological surveys anymore. We stick to well-traveled space lanes and well-lit stations. But sometimes, when it's storming hard and the power flickers, I can't help but think of that outpost on the ice. I wonder if it's still there, if that thing is still waiting for unsuspecting travelers to knock on its door. And I wonder, with a fear that never quite goes away, if someday, somehow, it might find us again. So if you're ever flying on a stormy night and your vessel breaks down on a lonely ice floe, be careful who you ask for help. Because sometimes the real monsters aren't in the storm. They're waiting for you to knock on their door. Story 7. The first sonar ping was so soft, I almost missed it over the groan of the station settling. I paused, my hand hovering over the diagnostic console, straining to listen. There it was again, a gentle, rhythmic ping, barely audible above the abyssal storm raging outside. I glanced at the chronometer, 0243. Who could be out here this late, especially in this weather? I'd been on this solo deep sea assignment for the weekend. The storm had been building for hours. The underwater currents howling around the corners of our old research station, making the viewports groan in their frames. grateful for the distraction of mindless data analysis to keep my imagination from running wild. But now, as I stood there listening to that soft, persistent pinging, I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the deep sea cold seeping under the seals. "Hello," I called out, my voice activating the external comms. "Is anyone out there?" No answer, just another series of gentle pings. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. It was probably nothing, maybe a system glitch, a ghost signal from the storm, or a research drone that had been knocked off course, desperate for a docking port. Slowly, I made my way to the main observation dome. Through the thick, reinforced plexiglass, I could see nothing but darkness and the silver sheets of silt illuminated by our floodlights. "Is someone there?" I asked again, my hand on the docking controls. Silence. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard it. A signal so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Please," it crackled over the comms. "Let me in." My blood ran cold. The signal didn't sound like any of my colleagues. It was high-pitched, almost childlike, but with an odd, distorted quality that set my teeth on edge. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What do you want?" "Please," the voice came again, louder this time. "I'm so cold, so lost. Let me in." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to back away, to seal every hatch and viewport in the station. But another part of me, the part that couldn't bear the thought of leaving someone out in this crushing deep, made me hesitate. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I can't open the airlock to an unknown vessel. Is there a transponder I can track for you? The authorities, maybe." A sound came then that made my heart nearly stop. It was a laugh, but not one of mirth or even irony. It was a cold, hollow sound that seemed to suck all the warmth from the air around me. "No authorities," the signal said, suddenly deeper, no longer even attempting to sound human. "No one but you. Let me in." The last three words were punctuated by thunderous blows to the hull, so powerful I felt them reverberate through the floor. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away. The pounding continued, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing second. I could hear the metal of the hull groaning and creaking under the onslaught. I ran to the main console, fumbling for the emergency distress beacon with shaking hands. But as I tried to activate it, I realized with horror that there was no signal. The storm must have knocked out the comms array. A deafening crack echoed through the station, and I knew the outer hull had been breached. Heavy, grinding footsteps thudded on the metal floor of the outer module, accompanied by a sound like something wet dragging across the ground. I looked around wildly, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. My eyes fell on the emergency submersible dock. It was my only chance. I bolted for it, not daring to look behind me. I could hear it coming, its breathing loud and ragged, far too close for comfort. My hands shook as I fumbled with the hatch release, precious seconds ticking by as I struggled to open the door. Finally, it swung open, and I plunged out into the emergency access tunnel. The water was coming down in sheets, instantly soaking me to the bone. The wind howled, nearly drowning out the inhuman shriek of rage that came from inside the station. I ran blindly through the emergency tunnel, my feet slipping in the pooling water. I had no plan, no destination in mind. My only thought was to get as far away from that thing as possible. I reached the edge of the docking bay, where a small, one-man submersible was kept for emergencies. I hesitated for a split second, the darkness of the open water looking even more impenetrable than the stormy abyss. Another shriek, closer this time, made the decision for me. I plunged into the submersible, the hatch sealing behind me. I don't know how long I piloted the sub, time seeming to lose all meaning in that dark, wet labyrinth. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but still I pushed on, terrified of what might happen if I stopped. Eventually, I broke out of the immediate vicinity of the station and found myself in open water. In the distance, I could see lights, a transport vessel, its running lights a beacon of hope in the darkness. I staggered towards it, relief flooding through me as I saw a rescue drone being deployed. I was safe. I was going to be okay. As I approached, the drone operator stepped out onto the deck, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, taking in my bedraggled appearance. I opened my mouth to respond, to pour out the whole terrifying story, but something made me stop. Over the operator's shoulder, I saw movement in the shadows beyond the vessel's bright lights. A figure stood there, tall and misshapen, its form seeming to shift and writhe in the darkness. As I watched, frozen in terror, it raised a hand, no, not a hand, a mass of writhing tentacles, and pressed a single appendage to where its mouth should be. The message was clear: say nothing or else. I looked back at the operator, who was still waiting for my response. I'm fine," I stammered. "Just got caught in the storm, had a system malfunction." The operator didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded. "Well, let's get you inside and warmed up. We can call someone to come get you." As he led me towards the vessel, I couldn't resist one last glance over my shoulder. The figure was gone, but I could have sworn I heard that cold, hollow laugh carried on the deep sea currents. I spent that night in the transport vessel, wrapped in a thermal blanket the crew found in the back, waiting for the storm to pass. I didn't tell anyone what had really happened. Who would believe me? When morning came and the storm finally stopped, I made my way back to the station in a rescue sub. The outer hull was intact, showing no signs of the violent entry I'd witnessed the night before. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. There were no wet footprints, no signs of an intruder. Had I imagined it all? Was it just a vivid nightmare brought on by the storm and too many late-night horror movies? But then I saw it. There on the floor, just inside the main airlock, was a single, long, black frond. As I picked it up, it seemed to writhe between my fingers, as if it were alive. I dropped it with a gasp and watched as it dissolved into a puddle of inkai black liquid that quickly evaporated, leaving no trace behind. In that moment, I knew it hadn't been a dream. It was real, all of it. And whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished with me. I left that station the very next day. I told my supervisors some story about a family emergency, about needing to be closer to home. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, my heart racing, sure that I've heard that soft, rhythmic ping against my door. And every time there's a storm, I make sure all my doors and windows are sealed tight, because I know the truth that most people don't. Sometimes the monsters that come knocking in the night are all too real, and once they've found you, they never truly let you go. Story 8. The distant echo of a sonar ping jolted me from my half-asleep state. I blinked, trying to focus on the diagnostic monitors in front of me. The deep sea station had been silent for hours, its vast corridors empty and dark. Yet there it was again, the unmistakable sound of an active beacon, its ping echoing through the deep water. I'd been working as a solo technician at the Erebus geothermal station for about 6 months. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid the bills. Most cycles, I just run my diagnostics, check the pressure seals, and spend the rest of the time streaming old movies on my datapad. But tonight was different. The abyssal currents outside had been raging for hours, buffeting the station and making the hull groan and creak. It was the kind of night that made you grateful to be indoors, even if that meant being alone in a creepy, empty underwater facility. I leaned closer to the monitors, scanning each screen carefully. Nothing seemed out of place. The hydroponics bay was deserted, the grow lights on their low power cycle. The main hub was still, its waters dark and silent. Even the biolab, usually so vibrant with glowing specimens, looked sad and abandoned in the dim emergency lighting. But there it was again, that sound. A single, deliberate ping coming from somewhere in the decommissioned sector. I grabbed my flashlight and comm unit, my heart beginning to race. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Maybe a system malfunction in the old sensors or a piece of loose equipment had somehow activated. But as I made my way down the motionless transport tube, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The decommissioned sector was even darker than the main station, the emergency lights casting long, eerie shadows. I swept my flashlight back and forth, its beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the vast space. "This is station maintenance. Is anyone there?" Silence. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, I heard it. A voice, soft and distant, coming from the direction of the old primary research lab at the end of the corridor. "Help me," it said, barely more than a whisper over the calm. I froze, my flashlight beam shaking slightly. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is a restricted area. The station is on lockdown. You need to leave immediately." "Please," the voice came again, louder this time. "I'm lost. I can't find my way out." Against my better judgment, I started walking towards the sound. The old research lab loomed ahead, its entrance a gaping maw of darkness. As I got closer, I could see that the pressure door was ajar. That was impossible. I sealed it myself during my last inspection. I stepped into the lab, my flashlight illuminating racks of old equipment and shelves of dusty specimen jars. "Hello," I called out again. "Where are you?" A movement caught my eye, a flash of white disappearing behind a bank of old computer terminals. I hurried towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. As I rounded the corner, I saw a small figure huddled on the floor. It was a child, a little boy in an old-fashioned, child-sized diving suit, his face hidden by the large, round helmet. "Hey there," I said softly, crouching down to his level. "Are you okay? How did you get in here?" The boy didn't respond. He just sat there, completely still, his helmet still facing away from me. "It's all right," I continued, reaching out a hand. "I'm here to help. Let's get you out of here and find your parents, okay?" Slowly, the boy turned his head. I felt my blood run cold. The helmet where his face should have been was empty, just a smooth, blank expanse of polished metal on the inside. I scrambled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight in shock. The boy, if you could call it that, stood up, its movements jerky and unnatural. It took a step towards me, its head tilting to one side at an impossible angle. "What the hell?" I gasped, my back hitting a rack of specimen jars. They clattered to the floor around me. The thing that looked like a little boy opened its suit. A dark, gaping hole appeared where its chest should have been. From it came a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was like 1,000 sonar pings screaming in agony, all at once. I didn't think, I just ran. I sprinted out of the lab, not daring to look back. I could hear it behind me, its footsteps no longer slow and deliberate, but rapid, gaining on me with inhuman speed. I reached the transport tube and practically flew up it, taking the rungs 3 at a time. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing was at the bottom of the tube, but it wasn't using the ladder. It was crawling up the wall on all fours, its body contorting in ways that defied physics. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, my heart feeling like it might burst from my chest. I could see the exit ahead, the sealed bulkhead promising safety beyond. Just as I reached it, I heard a crash behind me. I turned to see the thing had leaped from the tube, landing on a maintenance drone and crushing it beneath its weight. It stood up slowly, its blank helmet turning towards me. With shaking hands, I fumbled for the controls, trying to find the one that would seal the door. I could hear it coming closer, its footsteps echoing in the empty station. Finally, I found the right control. I slammed my hand on it, and the heavy door began to slide shut. I burst through just as it sealed, the thud of its impact final and absolute. I didn't stop running until I reached my own hab unit, deep in the secure sector. As I fumbled with my own door controls, I looked back at the station. There, pressed against a viewport, was the faceless boy. It stood perfectly still, watching me. Then, slowly, it raised one hand and waved. I got into my hab unit and sealed the door, my heart pounding. I spent the rest of the night jumping at every sound and shadow. I never went back to that job. I called the next day and quit, making up some excuse about a family emergency. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Who would believe me? But sometimes, late at night, when the currents are strong and the station groans around me, I think about that deep sea facility. I wonder if that thing is still there, wandering the empty corridors, waiting for someone else to hear its cry for help. And I wonder, with a fear that never quite goes away, if someday, somehow, it might find me again. So if you're ever in a place that should be empty, a closed research lab, an abandoned station, or a dark and silent deep sea facility, and you hear footsteps or a voice calling for help, don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero. Just run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because some things that lurk in the darkness are best left undisturbed. And once they've seen you, they never forget. They never stop hunting. And sooner or later, when you least expect it, they'll find you. Just like I know, deep in my bones, that one day that faceless boy will find me. And when it does, I can only hope I'll be ready. Story 9. The old lighthouse loomed before us, a dark spire against the swirling gray fog. Lightning wasn't needed here. The thick, disorienting mist created its own kind of storm. I glanced at my best friend, Finn, and saw my own apprehension mirrored in his eyes. Maybe this isn't such a good idea, I said, having to raise my voice to be heard over the mournful bellow of the distant foghorn. Finn shook his head, mist clinging to his wild hair. Come on, Maya. We've come this far. It's just an old lighthouse. What's the worst that could happen? I wish I'd never found out the answer to that question. We'd been on our way back from a coastal photography trip when the fog rolled in. It came out of nowhere, turning the world into a landscape of shifting gray before unleashing its full, disorienting power. The road had become treacherous, and when we took a wrong turn trying to find a better vantage point, we ended up hopelessly lost. That's when we saw it. The old lighthouse standing alone at the end of a long, crumbling causeway. It looked abandoned, but we thought maybe we could at least take some photos until the fog lifted. As we approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The lighthouse seemed to loom larger with each step, its lantern room like a single, dark, hollow eye watching our approach. The stone steps of the causeway were slick with sea spray. The sound of the waves crashing below barely audible over the dense fog. We huddled at the base of the tower, grateful for even this small shelter from the damp chill. That's when I noticed the light. It was faint, barely visible through the grime-covered windows of the lantern room, but unmistakable. A flickering, warm glow coming from somewhere deep within the fog. "Finn," I said, grabbing his arm. "Look, there's a light on inside." He squinted up through the swirling mist. "Holy crap, you're right. Maybe some old keeper still lives here." Before I could stop him, Finn was pounding on the heavy iron door. The sound echoed with an unnatural clang, seeming to be swallowed by the fog. We waited, the seconds stretching into minutes. Just as I was about to suggest we leave, we heard it. A faint, metallic ringing, like a ship's bell tolling for help. Finn's eyes widened. "Did you hear that? Someone's in trouble." He tried the large iron wheel on the door, and to our surprise, it turned easily. The door swung open with a low, mournful groan. The interior of the lighthouse was dark, save for that faint, flickering light we'd seen from outside. It seemed to be coming from somewhere high above. "Hello," Finn called out. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" The answering ring was louder this time, definitely coming from upstairs. It sounded pained, desperate. I grabbed Finn's arm as he started to step inside. "Wait, this doesn't feel right. Maybe we should call the Coast Guard." He shook off my hand. "There's no signal out here, you know that. Someone could be hurt. We can't just leave them." With that, he stepped over the threshold. After a moment's hesitation, I followed. I couldn't let him go alone, no matter how much every instinct was screaming at me to run. The floorboards groaned under our feet as we made our way through the base of the tower. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with the smell of rust and salt and something else. Something I couldn't quite place, but that made my skin crawl. We found the spiral stairs, a grand, sweeping structure that might have been beautiful once, but was now rotting and covered in slick algae. The light was definitely coming from the top floor, growing brighter as we ascended. At the top of the stairs, we paused. The ringing had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the mournful foghorn. "Hello," Finn called again. "We're here to help. Where are you?" A door at the end of the landing slowly creaked open. The flickering light spilled out, casting long, dancing shadows on the curved walls. We approached cautiously, peering into the room. It was the lantern room, the great glass lens taking up most of the space. In the center of the room was an old desk, and on it, the source of the light, a single oil lantern, its flame dancing in a non-existent breeze. But what caught our attention was the figure huddled in the corner. It looked like an old man, his face hidden by a long, matted gray beard. "Sir," Finn said softly, stepping into the room. "Are you all right?" We heard a bell. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge us in any way. I hung back in the doorway, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. Something was very, very wrong here. Finn crouched down next to the man, reaching out to touch his shoulder. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my days. The man's head snapped up, and I saw his face, or rather the lack of it. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin, like polished sea-worn stone, broken by a gaping, tooth-lined maw that opened in a silent scream. Finn recoiled, falling backward with a cry of terror. The thing that wasn't a man unfolded itself, its body stretching and contorting in impossible ways until it loomed over us, easily 8 feet tall. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I watched in horror as it reached for Finn with hands that ended in long, razor-sharp claws of sharpened bone. Finn's scream snapped me out of my paralysis. I lunged forward, grabbing his arm and yanking him away, just as those deadly claws slashed through the air where he had been. "Run," I yelled, pulling him towards the door. We sprinted down the hallway, the thing's inhuman shrieks echoing behind us. I chanced a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. It was crawling after us, its body twisting and writhing as it scuttled along the walls and ceiling like some monstrous crab. We practically flew down the stairs, our feet barely touching the steps. I could hear it right behind us, its claws scraping against the stone. We burst out of the front door and into the fog, not stopping, not looking back. We ran through the overgrown causeway, slick stones threatening to trip us, the sound of the waves crashing below. Finally, we reached the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car in drive, tires spinning on the wet pavement before finally finding purchase. As we sped away, I allowed myself one last look in the rearview mirror. There, standing in the lantern room, was the thing from the lighthouse. It raised one grotesquely long arm, almost as if it was waving goodbye. We drove for hours, not speaking, not stopping until we were far, far away from that lighthouse. We never spoke about what happened that night, not to each other, not to anyone who would believe us. But sometimes late at night, when the fog rolls in and the shadows seem to move on their own, I think about that lighthouse. I wonder if it's still there, waiting for the next unlucky travelers to seek shelter from the storm. And I wonder, with a fear that never quite goes away, if that thing is still there too, waiting patiently for someone else to hear its cry for help. So if you're ever driving on a foggy night and you see an old, abandoned lighthouse, don't stop. Don't seek shelter. Keep driving, no matter how bad the weather gets. Because sometimes the storm isn't the most dangerous thing out there. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. Story 10. The rover's engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of the great red desert. As if on cue, the thin atmosphere opened up, unleashing a torrent of fine, rust-colored dust that turned the world into a swirling, ochre blur. I sat there, hands gripping the control yoke, heart pounding in my chest. Of all the places to break down, this had to be the worst. I'd been driving for hours, trying to outrun both the approaching dust storm and my own thoughts. The failed terraforming project, the canceled mission, the feeling that my life was spiraling out of control. I thought a long drive might clear my head. Instead, it had led me here, to this desolate canyon in the middle of nowhere, with angry red clouds above and churning dust below. I tried the ignition sequence again, praying for the fuel cells to re-engage, but it was no use. The rover was dead. I reached for my comm unit, already knowing what I'd find. No signal, of course. Not that would be too easy. Dust lashed against the viewports, driven by a wind that seemed to want to push my rover right off the canyon ledge. I peered through the windshield, trying to gauge how far I was from either end. The canyon stretched out before and behind me, disappearing into the gloom. I couldn't see a clear path in either direction. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, shadows playing in the dust. But as I squinted, I could make out shapes moving on the canyon floor. People. No, not people. The shapes were too tall, too thin, their movements too fluid to be human. They emerged from the dust like ghosts, dark silhouettes against the red backdrop of the storm. There were 3 of them, spread out across the width of the canyon, moving towards my rover with a slow, deliberate pace. My mouth went dry, my palms sweating despite the chill in the air. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where could I go? I was trapped on this ledge, my dead rover the only shelter from whatever was approaching. As they drew closer, I could make out more details, each one making my heart race faster. They were impossibly tall, at least 3 meters, with limbs that seemed too long and thin for their bodies. Their faces, I couldn't see their faces, just smooth, featureless expanses where features should have been. They reached my rover, surrounding it. One stood at the front, one at the back, and one right outside my driver's side viewport. I held my breath, afraid that even the slightest movement might provoke them. A sound cut through the howling of the wind, a tapping on my viewport. Slow, deliberate, like the way they had walked. Tap, tap, tap. I turned ever so slowly to look out my window. The creature stood there, its blank face inches from the reinforced glass. As I watched, horrified, a seam appeared where its mouth should be. It split open, revealing rows of sharp, crystalline teeth. "Let us in," it said, its voice a hiss that somehow carried through the closed viewport and the roar of the storm. "We only want to help." I shook my head, unable to speak, unable to look away from that terrible mouth. The creature tilted its head, an eerily human gesture that only served to emphasize how inhuman it truly was. "Your rover is broken," it continued. "The storm is getting worse. Let us help you." "No," I managed to croak out. "No, thank you, I'm fine." The creature's mouth stretched wider, a grotesque parody of a smile. "Are you sure? It's not safe out here. Anything could happen to you." The threat in its words was unmistakable. I glanced at the other 2 creatures. They had moved closer, pressing against the rover. I could hear the metal groaning under their touch. "Please," I said, hating the tremor in my voice. "Please, just leave me alone." The creature at my window leaned closer, its blank face filling my vision. "We can't do that," it said. "You see, we're hungry, so very hungry. And you look delicious." Terror surged through me, breaking through the paralysis of fear. I lunged for the ignition, running the sequence desperately. To my shock and relief, the engine roared to life. I didn't stop to question this miracle. I slammed the rover into gear and floored the accelerator. The creature shrieked, a sound that set my teeth on edge and made my vision blur. The rover shot forward, and I felt a moment of resistance, then a sickening thud as I hit one of them. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I drove blindly through the dust, my headlights barely penetrating the gloom. I could hear things hitting the roof and sides of the rover. Were they jumping on it, throwing rocks? I didn't dare look. I just drove, faster than I'd ever driven in my life, praying to whatever might be listening that I'd reach the end of this nightmare canyon. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I saw it. The end of the canyon. Open desert ahead. I nearly cried with relief. As soon as my tires hit the flat sand, the pounding on my rover stopped. The shrieking faded away, replaced by the steady howling of the wind. I didn't slow down, didn't look back. I just kept driving, putting as much distance between me and that canyon as I could. I drove all night, through the storm and beyond. When the sun finally rose, I found myself in a small mining outpost I didn't recognize. I pulled into a fueling station, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. In the harsh light of day, I examined my rover. There were dents all over the roof and hood, and long scratches down the sides. The rear viewport was cracked, a spiderweb pattern spreading across the glass. But it was the smear of something dark and viscous across the front bumper that made my stomach turn. I couldn't bring myself to look at it too closely. I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? I told my supervisor I'd had an accident, swerved to avoid a rock slide in the storm. They were just relieved I was okay. But I'm not okay, not really. I can't sleep without seeing those faceless creatures in my dreams. I can't drive through canyons without breaking into a cold sweat. And every time a dust storm blows in, I find myself checking the shadows, sure that I'll see those tall, thin shapes emerging from the gloom. I don't know what those things were, or why they chose me that night. Were they some kind of monsters, aliens, demons, or something else entirely? Something our human minds can't comprehend. All I know is that they're out there, waiting in lonely canyons and deserted landscapes, waiting for someone's rover to break down, for someone to be vulnerable and alone, waiting to help. So if you're ever driving late at night and your rover breaks down in the middle of nowhere, be careful. Don't trust the shapes you see in the dust. Don't listen to the voices that offer help. And whatever you do, don't let them in. Because once they've found you, they'll never truly let you go. And the next time your rover breaks down, they might not take no for an answer. Story 11. A flash of lightning illuminated the deep sea trench. a gaping maw in the ocean floor that seemed to beckon me forward. I hesitated, caught between the fury of the abyssal storm at my back and the unknown darkness ahead. Another pressure wave from the storm made the decision for me. I guided the submersible into the cavern, the sound of my ragged breathing echoing off the damp, volcanic rock. I hadn't planned on going spelunking that day. It was supposed to be a simple geological survey, a chance to clear my head and escape the pressures of my failing research grant. But as I descended deeper into the trench, the weather turned treacherous. The deep blue darkened to an ominous black, and before I knew it, I was caught in one of the most violent abyssal storms I'd ever seen. Now, as I sat just inside the cavern entrance, watching sheets of silt lash the submersible, I tried to calm my racing heart. It's just a storm, I told myself. It'll pass soon, and then I can make my way back to the surface. I fumbled in my pack for my emergency flares, grateful that I'd thought to pack them. The chemical light cut through the darkness, revealing a passage that stretched deeper into the undersea mountain. Curious despite my apprehension, I took a few steps forward. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought they were just odd formations in the rock, tricks of light and shadow. But as I moved my flare across the cavern wall, I realized I was looking at carvings, ancient carvings, crude yet eerily lifelike, depicting scenes I couldn't quite comprehend. There were humanoid figures, stick-like and primitive, arranged in what looked like a circle. In the center of the circle was something else, something that made my skin crawl just looking at it. It was larger than the human figures, its form a twisted mass of tentacles, or perhaps elongated limbs. Where its head should have been, the carving showed only a dark void. I stepped closer, fascinated despite the unease growing in the pit of my stomach. As I examined the carvings, I noticed something odd. They seemed to be moving ever so slightly, as if the figures were shifting position when I wasn't looking directly at them. I blinked hard, sure I was imagining things. When I looked again, the carvings were still, just ancient art on a cavern wall, nothing more. I laughed nervously, the sound echoing in the empty cavern. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. It's just your imagination playing tricks on you. But as I turned to head back to the cavern entrance, my flare caught something that made my blood run cold. There on the opposite wall was a handprint, a fresh handprint, still glistening wetly in the light. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. That hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. I swept my flare around the cavern, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. But I was alone. Or was I? A sound reached my ears then, so faint I almost missed it. A whisper, like dry sand skittering across stone. It seemed to be coming from deeper within the cavern. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the cavern and take my chances with the storm. But a morbid curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. What if someone was hurt back there? What if they needed help? Hello, I called out, my voice shaky. Is someone there? The whispering stopped abruptly. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, I heard it. A voice, distant and distorted, as if coming from the bottom of a deep well. "Help us," it said. "Please help us." I took a step forward, then another. The beam of my flare danced across the cavern walls, illuminating more of those unsettling carvings. They seemed to watch me as I passed, their crude faces twisted in expressions of fear, or perhaps warning. The passage narrowed as I went deeper, the ceiling lowering until I had to stoop to avoid hitting my head. The water grew colder, heavy with the scent of brine and something else, something I couldn't quite identify, but that made my nose wrinkle in disgust. "Where are you?" I called out. "Keep talking so I can find you." "Here," the voice replied, closer now. "We're here. Please hurry." I rounded a corner and found myself in a large chamber. My flare couldn't reach the far walls or the ceiling, giving the unsettling impression that the room went on forever. In the center of the chamber was a pool of dark, still water, and there at the edge of the pool, I saw them. 3 figures huddled together, as if for warmth. They were turned away from me, their forms indistinct in the dim light. "Are you okay?" I asked, approaching cautiously. "Are you hurt? Do you need help getting out of here?" They didn't respond. They didn't move at all. As I got closer, I noticed something odd about their posture. They seemed too still, too rigid, almost like. My flare fell fully on them, and I realized with horror that they weren't people at all. They were statues, crude things of coral and stone. But they were positioned exactly as living people would be, their unseeing eyes fixed on the dark water of the pool. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. If these weren't the source of the voice I'd heard, then what? A flash from the pool made me jump. I swung my flare toward the sound, just in time to see ripples spreading across the surface of the water. Something had disturbed it, something large. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, a shape began to emerge from the pool. It rose slowly, water cascading off its form in oily rivulets. It was huge, its body a writhing mass of tentacles, or perhaps impossibly elongated limbs. And its head, I screamed. I couldn't help it. Where its head should have been, there was only a swirling vortex of darkness, a void that seemed to draw in all light and hope. It was the thing from the carvings, the ancient, terrible thing that the primitive artists had tried to capture on the cavern walls. And it was real. It was here. "Thank you for coming," it said, its voice the same one that had called for help. But now I could hear the malevolence in it, the ancient hunger. "We've been waiting so long for someone to join us." I turned and ran, dropping my flare in my panic. I fled through the dark passages, my hands scraping against the rock walls as I desperately sought the way out. Behind me, I could hear it coming, its many limbs scrabbling against the stone, its bulk squeezing through passages that should have been too small for it. By some miracle, I found the cavern entrance and swam out into the storm. the deep sea currents lashing my submersible and the howling of the storm in my ears. But I didn't stop. I ran the submersible up the mountain of the trench, slipping and sliding on the wet rocks, hydrothermal vents whipping at my viewport as I plunged through the deep. I didn't stop piloting until I reached my research vessel, parked at the surface. As I fumbled with the docking controls, I glanced back down the trench. There, silhouetted against the stormy abyss, I saw a shape, a massive, writhing shape that seemed to dwarf the undersea mountains around it. I got in my vessel and flew away as fast as I could, not stopping until I was miles away from that cursed trench. I never told anyone what happened that day. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. I know what's waiting in that cavern, hungry and patient, ready to lure in the next unsuspecting explorer who seeks shelter from the storm. So, if you're ever exploring the deep sea and you find yourself caught in a sudden storm, be careful where you seek shelter. Some caverns are better left unexplored. And some things that call for help don't really need saving at all. They're just hungry, and they've been waiting a very, very long time for dinner to arrive. Story 12. The ceramic doll sat on my doorstep, its glass eyes staring blankly into the stormy night. I stood frozen, one hand on the airlock control, as acidic rain pelted down around me. Where had it come from? And more importantly, where was the child it belonged to? I'd been in my hab unit, alone all cycle, trying to distract myself from the raging storm outside with mindless entertainment feeds. The power had flickered a few times, but thankfully had stayed on. It was just past midnight when I heard it, a sound so faint I almost missed it over the howling wind and pounding rain, a child's cry. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. But then I heard it again, louder this time. It seemed to be coming from right outside my main airlock. Without thinking, I rushed to cycle it, expecting to find a lost child seeking shelter from the storm. Instead, I found nothing, just the rain-soaked gantry and the ceramic doll, looking for all the world like it had been carefully placed there. I picked up the toy, acidic water dripping from its synthetic hair. It was old, well-loved, the kind of doll a child would be devastated to lose. But there was no child in sight. "Hello," I called out, peering into the darkness. "Is anyone there?" The only answer was a crack of thunder that shook the station. I stepped back inside, clutching the doll, and sealed the airlock. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I set the doll on the coffee table and grabbed my comm unit, intending to call station security. But as I dialed, I realized there was no signal. The storm must have knocked out the local comms relay. Another cry pierced the night, louder this time. It was definitely coming from outside. I rushed to the viewport, pulling back the thermal curtain to look out. For a moment, I saw nothing but rain and darkness. Then a flash of lightning illuminated the gantry, and I saw her. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7, standing in the middle of the walkway. She was soaked to the bone, her long, dark hair plastered to her face, and she was staring directly at my hab unit. Without hesitation, I grabbed my pressure suit and ran outside. Child or no child, I couldn't leave her out there in this storm. "Hey," I called out, jogging towards her. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" As I got closer, I realized something was off. The girl hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to my voice at all. She just stood there, rain streaming down her face, her eyes fixed on a point just over my shoulder. I slowed my approach, a chill that had nothing to do with the rain running down my spine. "Sweetie, can you hear me?" I was just a few feet away from her now, close enough to see that her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light. Close enough to notice that she wasn't blinking, wasn't even seeming to breathe. Suddenly, her head snapped towards me, her eyes locking onto mine. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. Her eyes were completely black, no whites, no iris, just endless pools of darkness. "Where is she?" she asked, her voice a raspy whisper that somehow carried over the storm. "Who?" I stammered, my feet rooted to the spot in terror. "My doll," she said. "You took her. I want her back." I opened my mouth to respond, to tell her the doll was in my hab unit, that she could have it back. But before I could speak, she was gone. Not running away, not fading into the darkness. She simply wasn't there anymore, as if she'd never existed at all. I ran back to my hab unit, slamming the airlock behind me and locking it with shaking hands. I leaned against it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. What had I just seen? It couldn't be real. It had to be a hallucination, a trick of the light and the storm. But as I turned around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The doll was gone. In its place on the coffee table was a puddle of water, and next to it, written in what looked horribly like blood, were 2 words: "Thank you." I didn't sleep that night. I sat huddled on my couch, every light in the hab unit blazing, jumping at every creak and groan of the old station settling. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep and too much crying. In the light of day, it all seemed absurd. A ghost child, a haunted ceramic doll. It had to have been a dream, a vivid nightmare brought on by stress and the storm. But as I went to make synth coffee, desperate for caffeine, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. There on my front gantry, visible through the galley viewport, was a small, wet footprint. A child's footprint. I called in sick to my shift that day. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the hab unit. Instead, I spent hours researching local station history, looking for any stories of missing children, of accidents on my sector. What I found chilled me to the bone. 50 years ago, almost to the day, a little girl had gone missing in this very sector. She had last been seen chasing after her favorite toy, a ceramic doll, which had been blown away in a storm. Neither she nor the doll were ever found. As I stared at the old news archive, my hands shaking, I heard something that made my heart stop. A child's laughter coming from right outside my main airlock. I looked up, dreading what I might see. There, peering in through my viewport, was the girl. She was smiling now, her black eyes crinkled at the corners. In her arms, she clutched the ceramic doll. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, she raised one hand and waved. Then, slowly, she faded away, taking the doll with her. I moved out of that HAB unit the very next day. I told my supervisor some story about a family emergency, about needing to be closer to home. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. Even now, years later, I can't travel down that sector without my heart racing. I avoid going out in storms, and I've developed an irrational fear of old dolls. But sometimes late at night, when the wind is howling and rain is lashing against my viewports, I swear I can hear a child's laughter. And in those moments, I wonder if she's still out there, still looking for someone to return her lost toy. So if you ever find a ceramic doll sitting on your doorstep on a stormy night, think twice before you bring it inside. Some lost things are better left unfound. And some spirits, once invited in, never truly leave. Story 13. The first sealed hatch I discovered was behind the old server bank in the comms room. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as the massive unit swung open with an ominous groan, revealing a dark, dripping access tunnel beyond. That was the moment I realized the deep sea station I just bought was hiding more secrets than I could have ever imagined. It had seemed like such a good deal at the time, a sprawling Triton-class research facility on the mid-Atlantic ridge, going for a fraction of what it should have cost. The corporate liquidator had been vague about its history, muttering something about the previous crew being evacuated in a hurry. But I was too excited about the prospect of owning such a unique piece of real estate to ask too many questions. Now, as I stood at the threshold of that hidden tunnel, I began to understand why the price had been so low. I'd been living in the station for about a week when I made my first discovery. I was clearing out the comms room, trying to make space for my own equipment among the outdated hardware left behind by the previous occupants. As I was moving a heavy server rack, my hand brushed against something on its back. A small, almost imperceptible switch. Curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it, and that's when the entire server bank swung open, nearly knocking me off my feet. The tunnel beyond was dark and cold, the air heavy with the scent of brine and decay. I hesitated for a moment, every deep-sea horror film I'd ever seen flashing through my mind. But the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. I grabbed a high-intensity torch from my toolkit and stepped into the passage. The beam of light revealed rough-hewn rock walls covered in a thick layer of bioluminescent algae. The floor was slick with moisture, uneven and treacherous. I moved slowly, careful not to slip. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading deeper into the abyssal mountain the station was built into. I lost all sense of direction, unsure if I was headed towards the geothermal core or the outer hull. just as I was considering turning back, I came to another hatch. This one was made of heavy, corrosion-resistant alloy, reinforced with titanium bands. It looked ancient, far older than the station itself. There was no visible handle or keypad, just a series of strange symbols etched into its surface. I ran my fingers over the symbols, trying to make sense of them. As I traced the final symbol, I heard a click. The hatch swung open, revealing a room that took my breath away. It was a vast cavern, far larger than should have been possible given the dimensions of the station around it. The walls were lined with glowing crystals that pulsed with a soft, inner light, illuminating shelves filled with artifacts that looked centuries old. In the center of the room stood a massive basalt table, its surface covered in strange instruments and open, water-logged logbooks. But what caught my eye was the far wall. It was covered in an intricate mosaic, depicting scenes that made my skin crawl. Creatures that defied description, writhing masses of tentacles and eyes, humanoid figures bowing before them in supplication or fleeing in terror, and at the center of it all, a swirling vortex that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. I approached the mosaic, drawn to it despite the dread building in my stomach. As I got closer, I realized with horror that the light wasn't a trick of the phosphorescent tiles. It was actually glowing, pulsing in a rhythm that matched the slow, deep thrum of the ocean around me. I reached out my hand, trembling, and touched the surface of the mosaic. The moment my fingers made contact, a jolt of energy surged through me. Images flashed through my mind, glimpses of other worlds, of beings too vast and terrible to comprehend. I yanked my hand away, stumbling backward. My foot caught on something, and I fell, hitting my head on the edge of the basalt table. Everything went black. When I came to, I was back in the comms room, lying on the floor in front of the still open server bank. My head throbbed, and for a moment I wondered if I had dreamed the whole thing. But the damp chill on my clothes and the lingering scent of that underwater cavern told me it had been all too real. I slammed the server unit shut, my hands shaking. What had I stumbled upon? What kind of people had worked in this station before me? Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself to leave, to abandon the station and never look back. But every time I thought about leaving, I felt a pull, an irresistible urge to explore further. There had to be more sealed-off sections, more secrets waiting to be uncovered. And I was right. Over the next week, I discovered no less than 5 more sealed hatches throughout the station. Each one led to a different chamber, each more bizarre and unsettling than the last. One room was filled with pressurized tanks containing specimens I couldn't begin to identify. Things that looked like crosses between deep sea fish and insects, but far larger than any known creature. Another held a collection of artifacts that seemed to defy the laws of physics, objects that floated in their containment fields or changed shape, when I wasn't looking directly at them. But it was the room I found in the lowest sub-level that truly terrified me. It was a small, circular chamber, its walls covered in polished, reflective obsidian. In the center stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal sat a book. The book was bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin, its pages waterlogged but preserved. As I approached it, I could hear a faint whispering, as if the book itself was trying to speak to me. With trembling hands, I opened it. The pages were filled with writing in a language I'd never seen before, accompanied by diagrams that made my eyes hurt to look at. But somehow, impossibly, I could understand what it was saying. It was a guide, a manual for opening doorways, not just the sealed hatches in the station, but doorways to other places, other dimensions, and the things that lived in those dimensions. The book described them in terrifying detail. I slammed the book shut, my heart racing. This was too much. I had to get out of there, had to get away from this station and all its impossible secrets. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in one of the obsidian panels. It wasn't my reflection staring back at me. It was something else. Something with too many eyes and a mouth full of needle-like teeth. I ran, scrambling up the ladders and through the station. I didn't stop until I was outside, in my personal submersible, gasping for breath in the cool, recycled air. That was 3 days ago. I haven't been back inside since then. I've been living in my sub, trying to work up the courage to either go back in and face whatever is in that station, or to ascend to the surface and run as far away as I can. But I know deep down that it's too late for running. Whatever was in that book, whatever I saw in that obsidian panel, it's aware of me now. I opened doors that were never meant to be opened, and now I have to deal with the consequences. So I sit here, recording this as a warning to anyone who might come across it. If you ever find a station that seems too good to be true, a place with more rooms than it should have, and secrets hiding behind every bulkhead, don't let curiosity get the better of you. Some hatches are meant to stay sealed. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Because once you open those doors, once you uncover those secrets, there's no going back. And the things waiting on the other side, they're always hungry for new visitors. I think I hear something moving inside the station now. I think it's time for me to face what I've unleashed. If anyone finds this, remember my story. And whatever you do, don't buy the station on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Some properties come with far too high a price. Story 14. The woman's eyes were wild with terror as she pounded on the airlock door. Acid rain plastered her hair to her face, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting something to emerge from the industrial smog. I hesitated, my hand on the cycle control. It was past midnight, and I was the only one working the graveyard shift at this remote atmospheric processing station. Opening the door went against every safety protocol, but the desperation in her face made me pause. I'd been working at the Titan atmospheric processor for about 6 months now, and I'd seen my fair share of strange transients. Drifters stumbling in at 3 a.m. for a breath of clean air. Off-world truckers with 1,000 light-year stares buying their 5th stim pack. Even the occasional shady character that made me glad for the reinforced plasteel around the control room. But I'd never seen anyone like this woman. She couldn't have been much older than me, maybe mid-20s. But the fear in her eyes made her look both younger and older at the same time. Her clothes were soaked through, corrosive mud caking her jumpsuit and boots. There was a wild, hunted look about her that set off every alarm bell in my head. Against my better judgment, I cracked the inner door open. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She practically fell into the station, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please," she panted. "You have to help me. They're after me." I quickly cycled the airlock behind her, my heart racing. "Who's after you? Should I call the authorities?" She shook her head violently, sending droplets of acidic water flying. No authorities. They wouldn't believe me. No one would. I led her to the small seating area where workers sometimes ate their nutrient paste. She collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking. I grabbed a bulb of water from the dispenser and handed it to her. "Here, drink this. Take a deep breath and tell me what's going on." She gulped down half the water before speaking. "My name's Alara. I was driving my crawler home from visiting my brother. The storm hit, and I took a wrong turn trying to find a shortcut." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. Outside, the rain pounded against the dome, and lightning illuminated the empty landscape in brief, electric flashes. I ended up on this old service road, miles from anywhere. My crawler, it just died. Right in the middle of nowhere. She paused, her eyes growing distant. That's when I saw them. A chill ran down my spine. Saw who? Alara's voice dropped to a whisper. They came out of the fog. At first, I thought they were people, maybe other prospectors coming to help. But the way they moved, she shuddered. It wasn't right. Too fluid, like their bones weren't solid. And their faces. She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was just her imagination playing tricks on her in the storm. But something in her voice, in the raw terror in her eyes, made me hold my tongue. "What about their faces?" I asked softly. "They didn't have any," she whispered. "Just smooth, blank skin where features should be." But somehow, I could feel them looking at me. Hungry, so hungry. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This had to be some kind of delusion, right? Maybe she'd hit her head when her crawler broke down. Or maybe a movement outside caught my eye. I turned to look, and for a split second, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, gliding across the gantry. Its head turned towards the station, and even through the rain-streaked plasteel, I could see the smooth, featureless expanse where a face should have been. I blinked and it was gone. just an empty gantry and the relentless rain. When I turned back to Alara, she was staring at me with wide eyes. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered. I opened my mouth to deny it, to rationalize what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself nodding. Alara let out a choked sob. "They followed me. Oh God, they followed me here." I tried to stay calm, to think rationally. "Okay, let's call the authorities. Whatever's out there, they can help." I reached for the comms unit behind the counter, but as I did, the lights flickered once, twice, and then we were plunged into darkness. The hum of the atmospheric processors died, leaving us in eerie silence, broken only by the sound of rain and our own ragged breathing. "They're here," Alara whimpered. I fumbled for the flashlight I kept under the counter, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. As the beam cut through the darkness, I saw something that made my heart stop. Pressed against the main viewport were 3 figures, tall, impossibly thin, their bodies swaying slightly as if moved by an unfelt breeze. And their faces, Alara was right. There were no features, no eyes or nose or mouth, just smooth, pale skin stretched over elongated skulls. As I watched, frozen in terror, one of them raised a hand. Long, spindly fingers ended in sharp points that looked more like talons than nails. It pressed its hand against the plasteel, and to my horror, I saw the material begin to ripple and distort, as if it were melting. "The safe room," I gasped, suddenly remembering the reinforced storage area in the back. "Come on." I grabbed Alara's arm and pulled her towards the back of the station. We stumbled through the darkness, knocking over supply crates as we went. Behind us, I heard the sound of shattering plasteel and knew the creatures had broken through the viewport. We reached the safe room just as I heard their footsteps entering the station. I shoved Alara inside and followed, slamming the heavy metal door shut and engaging the multiple locks. For a moment, we stood there in the darkness, our ragged breathing the only sound. Then, slowly, a scratching noise began on the other side of the door, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. "What do they want?" I whispered. Alara's voice was hollow with despair. "Us. They want us." The scratching turned to pounding, the whole door shuddering with each impact. I don't know how long we huddled there in the dark, listening to those things try to break through. It felt like hours. Just when I thought the door couldn't take much more, the pounding stopped. An eerie silence fell, broken only by a sound that chilled me to my core. A voice, raspy and inhuman, speaking from just outside the door. "We can wait," it said. "We have all the time in the world. I don't know how long we've been in here now. My datapad died hours ago, and the emergency lights in the safe room are starting to dim. Alara's asleep, or maybe unconscious. I can't bring myself to check. I'm writing this on the back of old shipping manifests I found in here, using a stylus that's quickly running out of charge. I don't know if anyone will ever find this, but I need to leave a record of what happened, of what's out there. If you're reading this, if you've come to investigate why the Titan atmospheric processor has gone dark, please be careful. Don't trust what you see in the shadows. Don't open this door unless you're absolutely sure it's safe. And if you hear scratching in the night, if you see tall, thin figures with no faces, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because they're patient and they're hungry, and they're always, always watching. Story 15. The figure stood motionless in the dust storm, a dark silhouette against the swirling red curtain of sand. I blinked, certain my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, it was still there, standing at the edge of the canyon that lined the lonely stretch of desert highway. I'd been driving for hours, pushing through the relentless storm to get to my next delivery point. The monotony of the humming engine and the hiss of the sand against the windshield had lulled me into a trance-like state. But the sight of that figure jolted me back to full alertness. As I drew closer, I could make out more details. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs too long and thin to be human. It wore what looked like a tattered black cloak that rippled in the wind, but it was the face, or rather the lack of one, that made my blood run cold. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth, pale expanse of skin. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. Every instinct screamed at me to floor it, to speed past this impossible apparition. But as I approached, the figure suddenly moved. It turned its featureless face towards me and took a single, fluid step onto the road. I slammed on the brakes, my rover fishtailing on the loose sand. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was going to hit it. But somehow, I managed to bring the vehicle to a shuddering stop just inches from where it stood. Time seemed to stand still. Sand hammered on the roof of my rover, but I barely heard it over the pounding of my own heart. The figure stood there, motionless, the red dust swirling around its form. I couldn't tear my eyes away from that blank face. Even without eyes, I could feel it staring at me through me. Then, slowly, it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed off into the canyon. I don't know what possessed me in that moment. Fear, curiosity, some primal instinct I couldn't name. Whatever it was, I found myself reaching for the door handle. My rational mind screamed in protest, but my body moved as if controlled by someone or something else. I stepped out into the storm, instantly blasted by sand. The figure towered over me, at least 3 meters tall. Up close, I could see that what I thought was a cloak was actually part of its body. A mass of writhing, shadowy tendrils that seemed to absorb the light around them. "What do you want?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely audible over the storm. The figure didn't respond. It just kept pointing into the canyon. Then, with a movement so fast I almost missed it, it was gone. One moment it was there, the next it had vanished into the dust. I stood there, sand stinging my face, torn between the safety of my rover and the unknown depths of the canyon. Logic told me to get back in the Rover, to drive away and never look back. But something deeper, something I couldn't explain, pulled me towards the canyon. Before I knew what I was doing, I was walking. Each step took me further from the road, deeper into the shadows of the canyon walls. The wind lessened in the shelter of the canyon, but an unnatural silence seemed to close in around me. I don't know how long I walked. Time lost all meaning in that strange, shadow-filled place. The canyon grew narrower, its rock walls intertwining overhead to block out what little light remained. I stumbled over loose rocks, my boots sinking into the soft sand. Just as I was about to turn back to try and find my way out of this nightmare, I saw it. A clearing up ahead, illuminated by a pale, otherworldly light. And in the center of that clearing stood a structure that defied explanation. It looked like an archway, but not one made by human hands. The frame was composed of twisted, obsidian-like rock that seemed to pulse with an inner light. And beyond the threshold, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. It was as if reality itself was warped and distorted, a swirling vortex of colors and shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The figure stood beside the archway, its blank face turned towards me. As I watched, frozen in a mix of terror and awe, it extended one long fingered hand towards me in a gesture that was unmistakably inviting. I took a step forward, then another. Some part of me knew I should be running, screaming, doing anything but approaching this impossible scene. But I couldn't stop. It was as if invisible strings were pulling me forward. As I got closer, I began to hear something. Whispers, countless voices speaking in languages I didn't understand, but somehow knew were ancient beyond imagining. They seemed to be coming from beyond the archway, calling to me, promising what? Knowledge, power, things beyond human comprehension. I was just steps away from the threshold when a sound cut through the whispers. A loud, insistent blare coming from the direction of the road. It was like a bucket of cold water, snapping me out of whatever trance I'd been in. I blinked, suddenly aware of where I was and what I was doing. The figure still stood there, its hand outstretched, but now I could see the malevolence in its posture. This wasn't an invitation, it was a trap. I turned and ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, sand whipping at my face, loose rocks threatening to trip me at every step. Behind me, I heard an inhuman shriek of rage that made my blood run cold. I didn't look back, I couldn't. I knew that if I did, I'd be lost forever. Somehow, I found my way back to the road. My Rover was still there, its headlights cutting through the dust, the horn still blaring. As I burst out of the canyon, I saw someone standing next to it, a fellow trucker, his face a mask of concern. "Hey, buddy," he called out. "You okay? I saw your Rover just sitting here and thought maybe you'd had an accident." I couldn't speak. I just stumbled to my Rover and collapsed into the driver's seat, gasping for breath. The trucker peered at me worriedly. "You sure you're all right?" You look like you've seen a ghost." I managed a nod, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. "I'm fine," I croaked. "Just got turned around in the canyon." "Thank you for stopping." He didn't look convinced, but nodded. "All right then. You be careful out there. The storm's getting worse." As he walked back to his truck, I chanced a glance at the canyon. For a split second, I thought I saw something. A tall, thin shape among the rocks. A pale, featureless face turned towards me. Then a gust of wind kicked up the dust, and it was gone. I started the rover and drove away, not slowing down until I was miles from that stretch of road. I've never told anyone what happened that night. Who would believe me? Sometimes I'm not even sure I believe it myself. But on stormy nights, when the wind howls and the sand lashes against my windows, I find myself drawn to look outside. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see a tall, dark figure standing at the edge of the desert behind my house. One long arm raised, pointing into the darkness beyond. And I wonder, with a mixture of terror and longing, what might have happened if I'd taken that outstretched hand and stepped through the archway. What wonders or horrors might I have seen? But then I remember the inhuman shriek of rage, the malevolence I sensed at the last moment, and I'm grateful for the trucker's timely intervention. Because I know deep in my bones that if I'd crossed that threshold, I would have never returned. So I keep my doors locked and my curtains drawn on stormy nights. And if I ever find myself driving down a lonely road in the desert, I keep my eyes fixed firmly ahead. Because some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some doors are meant to stay closed. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, lovely souls. I hope this story brought you a moment of calm and curiosity. I'd love to know what part of the story stayed with you the most. Drop a comment and share your thoughts. I always love hearing from you. If you enjoyed tonight's journey, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue exploring these quiet moments together. Now, take one last deep, gentle breath. Get cozy and let the calm of the night carry you softly until we meet again.